Hi, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lauren, and I'm the artist care manager at KUNE, and I also do some research and school things, which we don't have to get into right now. But yes, thank you for coming. This talk is called Moved, the Role of Art in Feeling and Belonging. For a really long time, just as a long-standing enthusiast of the arts, like theater, drama, music, I've always wondered, why does art make us feel this way? How does it make us feel this way? And how does that position us in relation to the other people in our life? So friends, family, other members at KUNE Festival. And along the way in my academic journey, I've met some really incredible people. And thankfully, they have decided to join me today. So first here to my left, I have Peter Varga, who is a PhD candidate in experimental psychology at the University of Oxford. Everyone say hi to Peter. Next up, I have Olivia Vander Elst, who is a PhD candidate at Aarhus University, studying the interaction of dance. And she also has an affiliation with the University of Oxford at their Center for Eudaimonia and Human Flourishing. Say hi to Olivia. Thank you. Next up, we have Brennan Delattre. Brennan is a PhD candidate in psychiatry at the University of Oxford. Give it up for Brennan. And we have Calum Smith. So Calum Smith is a research fellow at the University of Oxford, researching population health, and he's also a consultant at the World Health Organization. So today, the way that we have the panel structured, we'll have some individual presentations. Each person is going to present on their research interest and area of specialty, and then take a few questions. Then we'll go into some group panel discussion questions, and after that, we'll have an audience Q&A. Things may shift depending on the amount of time that we have and the questions presented, but yeah, we hope you enjoy the ride. And our first presenter is Peter Varga.
Hello, and thank you, Lauren. I am going to be talking a little bit about some of the foundational elements of, I think, what plays into all of our research, the social and emotional connections that are involved in how we interact with others, and what's special about not only making music with others, but the sort of community and transcendence aspects of listening to music with others and engaging with music in community settings. So to start, as Lauren said, I'm a researcher at the University of Oxford in experimental psychology. My own music background is as a guitarist and an organist, and as a Japanese taiko drummer. I always wanted to play in larger ensembles, and I wanted to do things that involved playing music with other people. But organ and guitar particularly are sort of solo instruments. But the thing that I was getting at, that you get sort of with the taiko drumming, but that I was looking at sort of my orchestral friends or singers, they seem to have so much fun and enjoyment playing together. And it seems that there's something particularly special about that. And so I'm going to start there, sort of ensemble playing. As a psychologist, I focus on sort of the psychology of creativity, well-being, aesthetics, and the arts. More broadly, my current project is looking at the transmission of emotion from composers to listeners as sort of mediated through performers' interpretations. So applying social models to how emotion is sort of this fluid medium that is connecting us through music. When we talk about sort of ensemble playing, the thing that I'm sort of picking up on perhaps is this intragroup or maybe intra-ensemble shared intentionality, which is a sort of sharing of psychological states that sort of enables collaborative behaviors. I think it has a lot to do with what brings us together in communities like these. Flow, which is the sort of optimal momentary experience of being totally focused or absorbed in a specific activity. And in some of the most dynamic sort of group situations, what we might call chemistry, which isn't just sort of the romantic sense of chemistry, but this idea of feeling this intense connection, a palpable spark that we often will attribute to both the groups of musicians that we might listen to, and also the sort of feel of when we're in a group where we have that spark together. these experiences, I guess, are characteristic of interaction rituals. We might call these close intersubjective contact between individuals. Again, it has a lot to do with perhaps why we're all here. And then it can lead to what one of the founding fathers of sociology, Emil Durkheim, described, I think, very effectively as collective effervescence, this idea of emotion intensification greater than that experience individually resulting from this sense of group entrainment. I suspect that Olivia and Brennan are going to talk a little bit more about entrainment in how we move and synchronize our movements and also our biorhythms through dance. But one of the most effective ways that we do this is by listening to music with a strong sense of beat or pulse together. These sorts of interaction rituals where we can have the synchronization can be sort of formal rituals encompassing identities and incorporating spiritual practices, but they can also be very fluid, such as playing music with or even for someone else. You're having this sort of social relation. A lot of my research is based on this idea of taking social paradigms of interaction, which largely have to do with how two people might interact in sort of verbal conversation, and applying that to how a musician might be interacting with their audience, how the audience may affect the musician, how the composer who wrote the music, who may be different from the performer, is sharing that intentionality all the way through to the people listening and experiencing their music. The sort of emotional correlates of these experiences can range from the mundane, sort of having a meal or sharing a meal with your friends, to higher states that have been described variously in the psychological literature as exalting, absorbing, transporting, and transcendent. And I'm particularly interested in these higher aspects, these higher affects, the self-transcendent experiences, and what these have to tell us about our well-being and why we need them. This is particularly intriguing to me because theorists in my area have been calling for further research into these higher forms of well-being that are indicated by such states but not fully accounted for by sort of existing models of what we might call hedonic or sort of happiness-based well-being, or eudaimonic, which is sort of meaningfulness-based well-being. We've looked at these effects in visual art, how artists convey emotion, content, and meaning and create community with their viewers through installation art. Some of you may have been experiencing that already on this visit. Others have looked at this sort of contagion process of how higher states such as inspiration and awe are contagious through creative writing, where a poet who is inspired can affect the level of inspiration of these higher affects of their readers through their poem without any direct social contact. And I've particularly looked at these things through aesthetic emotions of beauty, wonder, and awe in science. I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about the interaction of art and science at a panel tomorrow with Leo, so do come back for that. But I've tried to synthesize all this research to look at this particular project of how and what's so special about the way in which composers' intentionality shapes communities. Because basically all of the empirical research on this is focused entirely on the listener's experience without thinking about how there might be the social interplay in the larger sense of community involving the people who create and perform the music as well. So pivoting slightly to how these sorts of musically informed communities can make us better, we know that playing music as an individual is already correlated with subjective well-being, reduced anxiety, enhanced mood. But as we've seen, there's something special about playing music in a group, listening to music in a group, having these live experiences and these embodied experiences, particularly when we have that sense of a spark or that click, that when groups gel or we have experiences of group flow. So it's worth examining some of these underlying mechanisms that support this. Using one example from a research project, not from our research group at Oxford, but that really informs a lot of what we do. We know that being in a group and playing music together, listening to music together reduces stress and sort of increases subjective well-being. And for a long time, the thought was this was because we're reducing the stress hormone cortisol, and we would see this indicated by a reduction in that stress hormone. We see there's a difference between people who are listening to music together or are singing together than people who are just chatting together. So just being social has some benefits, but there's something particular about being in this sort of group musically informed setting. What surprised researchers, however, was that this wasn't sort of indicated by a reduction in the stress hormone cortisol, but rather by an increase in oxytocin, which is the love hormone, right? That's what promotes affiliation. It's what promotes community. And so there's something special about music informing these communities that really underpins a lot of these well-being effects. And it also says a lot about the importance of community for our social well-being. This supports these theories of self-transcendent well-being, going beyond the limits of the self, going beyond sort of individualism, that account for the content of these experiences. For example, the beauty of, or the emotion of the music, the mode of relating to the contents, such as sort of encounter, radical encounter, especially in this case, the transmission, conveying this emotional content to other people, sharing it in these large group collective situations. And so the act of sharing in an emotional experience as a group, of performing, listening, and this dialogue between performer and audience has analogs in other disciplines such as academic science, which I've alluded to already, whether it's sort of the thrill of discovery, the act of sharing findings, teaching, mentoring, publishing, disseminating this information, which again we'll talk more about tomorrow, but also sort of these similarly aesthetic experiences that are likewise sort of empirically differentiable from basic need satisfaction and meaningfulness. And so laying the groundwork for what we do, I guess these intersections are only just now beginning to be investigated. These are things that I've sort of had an intuitive sense about. I suspect you as well have had, but are only just now sort of becoming of interest to empirical science. Not that we need empirical scientists to tell us that these experiences are things that we've had, we actually have, but it actually tells us a lot about our humanity and why community is important, just particularly in the current social situations. So I'm interested in how these intersections of research can provide future collaborations, and I think there's a ripeness for these collaborations, both with the musicians, the artists, and those who research these things, but also with the audiences and the people who are sort of experiencing these things. As a result, I'm interested to hear from you, and so we can take a few questions now, and then I think we'll have a much more broader interdisciplinary discussion after. So perhaps I will stop there in the interest of hearing a bit from you guys. Or not. If you need time to yes, we can have the discussion as we filter in more ideas.
Okay, confirming there are no questions as of now. Yeah, so am I. Yeah. Wonderful, great. Thank you so much, Peter. We'll save any questions for the larger discussion then. Great, and now I'll pass this to Olivia, who has a mic.
Indeed. I've also realized I actually want to stand and probably move the table, if that's okay. So I realize I may be messing up the filming, sorry, but I want to be able to see you all, given that, you know, we're talking about sort of interaction and all that kind of thing. I need my cue cards on my phone. Sorry, just a second. So as Lauren said, my name is Olivia. I'm doing a PhD here in Denmark at the University of Aarhus. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background, hopefully without tripping over the cable, because neuroscience of dance is a little bit of an unusual thing to be doing a PhD in. So my journey to get here is that I actually am a musician. I play violin and viola. I went to a specialist music school in the UK and then changed path completely and studied chemistry at the University of Oxford. Just because why not? You know, it's interesting. Exactly. And then I decided I didn't want to do that either as a career. And I spent a few years doing a lot of teaching, private tutoring, figuring out, well, what do I actually want to do? And figured out the answer to that was combining my expertise and my love for arts and sciences. And ended up through many various long paths, which I don't have time to describe here. So one of the things I want to do to start off, just to warm you up a little bit, is a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to divide you in two roughly. So I think about here, lady with the lovely ginger hair and the lady in front of you you can be on that side. And then chap in the shirt and hat, and everyone to the right, that side. This is going to be difficult to do with a microphone, but the people to my left, you can absolutely go with your friend if you like. I'm not trying to split up friendships here, I promise. The people to my left, what I want you to do is clap 2 times to every 1 clap of mine. So. Yes. Perfect. People to my right. Do I need the microphone? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. So, every time I clap, I want you to be clapping 3 times. So you're going. Okay, so over here, you're going to be clapping twice to every 3 claps of mine. And over here, you're going to be clapping 3 times.
Come with your clap or after?
Yes. So if I'm going, I will do with my foot what my hands will be doing, and I'll do with my hands what you'll be doing with your hands. Good. Okay, let's practice again this side. Do the same. I will do it with my foot. What I will be clapping with my hand. Perfect. And now, everybody together. So you're clapping twice, and you're clapping 3 times. So. Very nice. Great. So, thank you very much for taking part. It's always nice to get people doing that. So this is really nice as well because it's just a little thing of getting towards moving in a group, playing music in a group, dancing in a group. A little bit difficult to get to fully dancing in a group here, given that, it's a talk. So thank you again. Now I need my cue cards. And next thing I am going to ask you all as well is if anybody feels happy sharing, why do you dance? Anybody?
I don't think while dancing.
You don't think while dancing? Lady in the green? Because I feel free when I dance. Yep. Anybody else? Great. A perfect way to move my body and a workout and having fun at the same time. Those answers actually pretty much cover all of the things I wanted to talk about. So this is great. One of the things that comes up over and over again is loving it, exercise, community, the social aspect of it, all of the things that we're talking about here, really. Also, from a scientific perspective, it's a great way to study the human condition, exactly what Peter was saying, really, that we can study humanity. What is it that makes us human? We can study something that people do out in the wild, as it were, rather than, tapping and you're just tapping away. And then maybe there's another person next to you and they're tapping. And you see, who is tapping first? Not really something that people actually usually do. So dance is a great way to be able to actually, investigate what's going on there. And again, Peter mentioned this more in the context of music, but also very true in dance. It's hugely beneficial for well-being, physical well-being, emotional well-being. This will also tie into some things that I believe Brennan will be talking about in terms of loneliness. And there is all sorts of therapeutic uses for dance. People with Parkinson's, with Alzheimer's, with mild cognitive impairment, you get them into settings where they're dancing and you start seeing these amazing improvements. And nothing is better than dance, basically. There was this amazing review that came out last year, and they analysed all of the research that they could find on dance therapy. And it's always compared to another activity, right? You have a control. So that might be sitting and doing puzzles. It might be being taught about nutrition. It might be spinning or walking. Dance is always as good as what it's being compared to, and very often it's better. So we don't really know why yet. It's one of the things I'm working on. Hopefully, maybe we'll have an answer in 20, 30 years' time. We'll see, I guess. And again, tying in with Peter's point on music, we know that children who take music lessons as children, they have better empathy, they have more social skills, and like, what's not to love with that, right? Especially in today's day and age when we're all zooming into our phones, sucked into our iPads, and with this weird kind of, we're being social online, but we're not being social in person. So even more important to be bringing that to kids as they're growing up in this digital age that I think most of us here looking around, judging ages, we were probably kind of on the cusp of and didn't have when we were small children. And another interesting point which I wanted to mention on dancing in groups leads to higher pain thresholds, and also again ties into what Peter was talking about in terms of oxytocin. And just a little thing to leave you with, there's some really great research being done in Finland where they're modeling people dancing in a group. So you have people as blobs, swarmulators, and you tell the computer, off you go and model how these people are going to move in these contexts with this kind of music, playing with these kinds of tempo that you're expecting them to move to. And it kind of just looks like random Brownian motion at first. So you've just got all these dots wiggling around on the screen. And then if you change one of the parameters, you say, let's just put in each person, swarmulator, dot, however you want to formulate it, they can only see in front of them, 180 degrees. Suddenly you get circles spontaneously forming. Because in a circle, that's the best way that everybody can see everybody else. So it might be a nice little thing to think about as you're here at the festival, and hopefully, I hope, dancing and getting moving. If you're seeing circles forming spontaneously on the dance floor, if you're in one of those circles, it is all about community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olivia.
I hope I was on time. Sorry, I didn't actually see if you were... Great. Perfect.
Okay, next up we have Brennan.
Who also has her own mic. Let's see if it's... Yeah. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So I'm really glad Olivia warmed us up with an exercise. For mine, we're going to have to stand up, so I'm glad we're escalating in the order of difficulty. I'm going to ask Andre to come help demonstrate what we're going to do today. So my research is social dance for mental health. I study salsa dancing as an intervention for depression. I'm going to tell you more about it, but before we do that, we're going to do just a little mirroring exercise. One, because it's raining and a little cold to get you moving, but two, to kind of attune you to the people around you. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, and then we're going to try it. All right, beautiful. Thank you for playing with me. You are welcome to sit down. All right. Hi. Okay, so I'm Brennan. As Lauren said, I'm a doctoral student at the University of Oxford in the Department of Psychiatry. Basically, everyone else in my lab studies various drugs for mental health, and I study salsa dancing. And so today I'm going to tell you, we've got a really nice setup of this panel today. We've got kind of the science behind why we think some of this works, all the way through to the interventions about using, oh, it's a boat, okay. The interventions about using things like social dance for good. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the problem that I'm trying to address with my PhD, and then I'm going to tell you why we think social dance is good, and the research that exists, and some of the directions that we're going, and really looking forward to talking with you all during the questions and answers. So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, depression is a huge societal problem. It's one of the leading causes of disability globally, and loneliness is a risk factor for depression. Loneliness is also increasing worldwide, so being lonely sets you up to be more likely to have depression and be more likely to not do as well during treatment. And conversely, things like close friendships and people who care about you are protective factors against depression. And so we're faced with this problem when we think about the medical system addressing depression, which is you can go to the doctor and they can prescribe you medication, which works for some people in some ways for some period of time. They can prescribe you therapy, which requires having a therapist who kind of administers that for generally a set course of time, depending on where you live. That might be longer or shorter, depending on things like health insurance. But you can't really go to the doctor and have them prescribe you 10 close friendships, which we think might be really useful for depression. And so kind of how else do we address that? And my background is I've been dancing, partner dancing since I was about this tall. It was ballroom dance and then swing dance, and nowadays more salsa and bachata, Latin dance. I also play capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian martial art dance form that has elements of lots of things we talked about earlier today. So kind of singing and moving in unison, this mirroring stuff, and lots of other things that we think are potentially good. And so I kind of, as I traveled around academically and recreationally, started noticing that across these different lines of gender and socioeconomic status and ethnicity and physical ability and all sorts of other things, people would walk into these capoeira classes, salsa classes, and walk out saying that they felt better. And so I became interested a long time ago in how can we use something that is social and movement and creativity based as potentially a cost-effective and non-invasive and community-based mental health intervention. And I now live in the UK, where we have the National Health Service. As with many places in the world, the waiting list for mental health care is very long, and research suggests that as people wait, they tend to get worse and do worse once you give them treatment. And so we're always on a quest for how can we send people who are waiting for mental health care to something that helps them, if not get better, at least not get worse. And so right now what my PhD is addressing is basically social dance for mental health. We're doing salsa dance specifically at the moment, but really kind of, it doesn't have to be salsa, it doesn't have to be capoeira. Anything that's a social and movement-based activity is potentially useful. And to talk about it kind of more medically, we think of that as a combined intervention. So it might be that right now, if you were to go to the doctor and you were feeling quite depressed, you might be prescribed a pill and also therapy if you were doing pretty badly. We think that something like social dance is essentially a combined intervention because it has things that are evidenced already. We know that exercise is good for mental health. We know that moving in synchrony is good for mental health, alluding to some of the research we were talking about early. We talked about music for mental health and creating things. And so if you take all of these things together into something like, for example, salsa dancing, maybe in the time that we have, I keep hearing that horn and thinking it's the end of the presentation, maybe if we only have an hour to work with you in a community-based setting, maybe something that's got elements of all of these things could be extra beneficial to you, especially if you don't have access to something like medication for your mental health or therapy. And something that's really, and so yeah, I do want to talk about loneliness a little bit because loneliness is definitely an epidemic. Lots of things to talk about in terms of different individual and interpersonal kind of qualities of social dance and why it might be useful. But on the individual level, in terms of loneliness being difficult. Something that social dance does that other kind of treatments for depression, anxiety, et cetera, don't, is if you start going to these classes, people will check up on you, right? If you disappear for a while because you're feeling low, hopefully the other people in the class will notice that you're not there and kind of pull you back in. And so really, the community part is the mental health aspect, or is definitely a big part of the mental health aspect in these social and movement-based interventions. In terms of interpersonally, we talk a lot about empathy And so this game that you just played is very much a demonstration, a very quick demonstration. It's very impossible to play that game to mirror the person next to you, to be attuned to the person next to you if you aren't taking yourself outside of yourself and kind of focusing on what's going on with them. That's good for a lot of different reasons in terms of mental health, but the empathy of, it doesn't matter kind of what our different demographics are. If we're standing here mirroring each other, there's going to be more connection than if we're not. And so it really, in terms of like, we live in a very polarized time that doesn't seem to be getting any better, according to the research. I don't know if it's going to be, but also things like social movement activities together help transcend those lines. And so, as everyone here has alluded to, there's a lot of different research going on when it comes to broadly defined kind of dance and social movement for health. And because there's been a lot of us interested in that over the last decades in different ways, you see things like, for example, for people with Parkinson's, tango classes, and you see different researchers in neuroscience and psychology and psychiatry looking into this. But I'm also really interested in kind of how can we test if something is good in terms of developing metrics. And unfortunately, because a lot of people are interested in it, there hasn't been a lot of standardization in how we measure. For example, should we ask the National Health Service in England to put dance as one of the options compared to something like cognitive behavioral therapy, compared to like antidepressants? And so the quest that I'm on, and kind of I think more of us as a field are on at the moment, is can we, when we do our research, measure the effects of social dance versus these other standardized treatments in a way that then we can go to, for example, government and private healthcare providers and say, actually, this is good. It's not just because, I think everyone here, this is very much preaching to the choir. We know that social movement is good. We wouldn't really be here otherwise. But anecdotally is not generally how things kind of make their ways into healthcare systems. And so what we're doing right now is we are trying to kind of standardize how we conduct that research. Does it have a control group? Do we randomize our participants into different conditions? How do we do this at kind of the golden standard based on what our healthcare systems are providing already, to test that, to implement it? And so there's lots of very exciting research happening on that. Right now, I am getting ready for a study in the National Healthcare Service where we take people who are on the waiting list for anxiety and depression, and we say, hey, would you like to, for free, also do 8 weeks of salsa dancing classes, and see if you tell us that that means that you're feeling better, and how is your experience with that? Do you show up? Do you keep going? And if they say yes, then we're hopefully going to do a clinical trial at some point afterward, and maybe at some point this stuff will really make its way into healthcare systems. So yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Brennan. Now we're moving into Calum Smith's work.
Hiya. I'm going to stand up too, mainly so there's like full trouser appreciation. Thanks. This festival was sick. I'm sorry if like standing and talking is a multitask too far for me, because I've been here since Wednesday, and I'm going to kind of divide this talk into two sections. I'll talk about some of the research that's been going on into how arts and health relate to each other, and then talk about two projects that I've been running for the WHO. And like Lauren said, I'm a research fellow at Oxford. I did my DPhil in population health there, and I've been a consultant for the WHO for the last 5 years. And before getting going, I just thought, this is the first festival that I've been to completely on my, obviously, met loads of people, and everyone's been, but like without like, my mates that I've had since I was 6. And I went to Basement in New York in like April by myself, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. This might be awful. I might feel really lonely. And then I put a tune on afterwards, just like a playlist on random. And there's a spoken word poet called Anthony Smerek. And one line in his song is, sometimes it takes a room full of strangers to make you feel less alone. And that's kind of all I felt while being at this festival so far. So just thought I'd start with that. The field I work in is broadly called arts and health. And within population health, it's kind of like a new-ish field. Like it's only been going on for the last 20 years, which is quite bizarre because humans have always done art. And I think partly why that's the case is there's kind of like a really strong biomedical focus to population health in general. Like if you have cardiovascular disease, you look at the heart. Cancer is related to cell biology. Because of that kind of like biomedical focus, there tends to be a focus on like the individual, the body, rather than the kind of community and belonging that, as we all know, can really help with health and well-being. So there's two research reports that I'm going to talk about. The first one was published by the WHO in 2019 in the office just over there, or wherever it is, the spiky one. And there's a study, it's like kind of the first big international study of arts and health, and a systematic review of like over thousands of studies. And some of the key findings were that broadly within population health, there's kind of like 4 approaches. There's like prevention of ill health, health promotion, so helping healthy behaviors, management of symptoms, and treatment. And the study found that across all of these different areas, I've just realized I've got full trousers in the camera. Unintentional. And across all of these different areas, they found that arts and health can really help. So, for example, there's studies on theatre making in Bosnia and Herzegovina to help with the post-conflict. There's studies into relationships between babies and their mums, which I'll talk about a bit later. And there's studies specifically looking at dance. They looked at how young people that are involved in dance classes, the longer they spent in these dance classes, the less likely they were to engage in risky behaviours. So across all of these different areas and loads of different creative outlets like music making, collective music making, dance, writing, all of these different things were found to help in a broad variety of ways with health in general. And this was kind of backed up by a report that the European Commission did a couple of years ago, which I was lucky enough to help edit, that looked at, it's called the Culture for Health Report, and it looked specifically at different creative outlets and different artistic practices and how that helped. And for dance, for example, there was a study that showed that even nurses who were kind of asked to join this kind of creative dance workshop, it helped with their communication with their patients. It helped with school attendance in people under the age of 20. It helped with stress in work, and kind of across all of these different sections, from like prevention and promotion and management and treatment, all of these different sections, dance was found to help. And this is kind of across studies internationally. So just to say the evidence base is kind of there and it's kind of growing. We can have a chat about reports and epidemiology if you want after this. We could just have a pint, whatever. But so just to say that the evidence is there and it's growing and it's kind of really gathered momentum. Like there's been a report in Nature and The Lancet recently, which is the first time it's kind of happened within population health, that art and health is getting this attention. And it's because community and belonging is so key to individual and community health, and it's kind of really, really gathering momentum. So that's just a bit of background about the fact that the research is going on. And I'm going to talk briefly now about 2 projects that I've been helping run for the WHO. The first is called Music and Motherhood. Now, in the UK, about 10 years ago, there was a study that worked with women with postpartum depression and did a control study to see if different artistic activities could help reduce or help manage the symptoms of postpartum depression. And it found kind of overwhelmingly that engaging in like a 10-week course of music and singing activities as a group, it helped reduce these symptoms. So what we did at the WHO was kind of take this very specific, focused on London research and tailor it. We ran it in Italy and Denmark and Romania, and it's in the process of being run out in like Sweden, Portugal, Singapore, Scotland and Ireland. And I feel bad because I've probably forgotten some others. Anyway, this study basically brings together women with postpartum depression, and they come to the sessions with their babies because a lot of kind of antenatal care focuses on the baby and there's not much specifically for the mum. So this project basically brought people together for 10 weeks and they could volunteer to create their own songs or to sing their favorite songs in different languages. We had 2 different language groups in Romania, and people kind of volunteered to sing whatever song they'd like and bring it forward as a group. And the study found that over this 10 weeks, the same in Romania, Denmark and Italy, and the same is kind of coming true in the other places as well, that engaging, the simple act of engaging in these classes once a week or an hour a week for 10 weeks really helped reduce the symptoms of postpartum depression, increase feelings of social connectedness and well-being, and increase senses of overall well-being. So on the basis of that, it was the first time that I'd been involved in kind of translating an arts and health intervention that we knew was kind of recommended in policy into practice. And off the back of that, we're in the process of running a project called Inuso now in Greenland, which basically came about because we're like, right, we know that arts and health have a huge, huge positive impact on people's health and well-being. There's obviously a real kind of population issue around mental health in young people in Greenland. So the project is going to run from November to January this year, and it's kind of a collaborative creative theatre piece. We went to Greenland at the start of this year because obviously the focus of this talk being about community and population health being what it is, it's quite easy for people to kind of like parachute into a community and say, this is what we think is evidence-based, this could help. But kind of the point of working with community in the most impactful and beneficial way is kind of co-creating a community with people in the community. Like, I'm fully aware that I'm like a white bloke who goes to Oxford, and me rocking up in Greenland being like, let's do this, is definitely not how research should be done. So in the process, this has been going on for like 2 years, and we've done co-creation activities in Aasiaat in Greenland. We've been working with indigenous researchers, working with people who specifically look at like language and how the language of mental health and community that we kind of use in like paradigmatic WHO Oxford kind of environments, whether that translates into the specific community working with in Greenland. So for example, there's a lot of talk in mental health of like cause and effect, and within Kalaalleq, the Greenlandic language, that kind of like linearity that I guess in Euro-American, like Western-centric universities we kind of assume is there in like a scientific sense, doesn't really work within the Kalaalleq language. So we've been working with the community in order to kind of like co-create this intervention, which will hopefully help reduce suicidal ideation in the long term, but even just in the short term, help with feelings of well-being. So before I finish, I was chatting to some mates about this, and they first were like, talking at a festival, that's weird, you've definitely made this up. But I was talking to a mate who's a poet, and I was like, do you have anything? Like, I'd quite like to do something creative, because trousers or no, coming here and talking about like epidemiology isn't potentially the most engaging thing. And he was like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. Over the last couple of years, he's asked some of his mates to just kind of like keep a note in their phone of random things that they'd heard at nights out in warehouses at festivals. And he kind of put it together into a found poem. So not mine, but I'll read this for you if that's all right. In a crowded room, I saw you stood there on your own, wanting to dance but needing someone to get lost with. So you're not solo or visible and conspicuous. Someone's shoulder to lean into and someone's feet to sync up with, to share the lifeblood that's sound in the anonymity that a crowd gives. I've got 2 left feet and I'm kind of at my social limit, but if this night's to become something, we might as well begin it. We're all dancing for each other and walking each other home, lost together under strobe lights to base that rattles bone. We're all dancing for each other because the greatest thing that there is someone's shoulder to lean into and someone's breath to sync up with. Sometimes dancing for each other is the kindest thing we can give, sweaty shoulders to lean into and breathless words to get lost in. I think dancing with each other is my favourite thing that there is, a loving shoulder to lean into and wordless breath to sync up with. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Calum. And wow, what a poem. I was tearing up a bit. I realize now that in the individual presentations, I had forgotten to ask about questions for Olivia's and Brennan's and now also Calum's. So are there any specific questions that we might be able to address? Yes. That's fine.
I'm excited to try to answer this.
Maybe
it's going to be some
this is
backup.
like a 3-part question, no?
Yeah, it's a little bit, just answer what you feel like, you know?
If I miss anything important, please. Yeah, for sure. Especially if you're studying something similar. Wow, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So I think that over the last 10 years I've been doing this work, it has felt a little bit like swimming upstream, trying to get organizations to support it. I don't know if that's other people's experiences too. I think something really special about this panel is a lot of us are kind of the odd one out in what we do when it comes to studying creative arts in the kind of spaces that we do. Your second question, the tactical one on how do we get people to pay attention, people in positions of power. I've got to tell you, so I've got 3 supervisors for my PhD. One of them is at UCL, and he is really great at what he does, and he's got some power. He's like the director of the department, and he was a salsa dancer when he was at university. And so I think that in terms of like having conversations about these with the people who have the power to make the decisions, I think probably some of them go to festivals, and I think probably some of them are social dancers in some way. And I think that sometimes it's just about either trying to evidence it, which is what I think some of us are doing from the inside, or maybe there's a way to find the people who are already participating in these activities and ask them in their professional capacity to support them. I do think that the world is moving in this direction. I recognize that I live within a bubble where there's a lot of creative arts research going on, but I do think that over the course of the last couple of decades, people are becoming, I mean, just hearing what's going on at the World Health Organization and, you know, the different studies that are happening, I think that not just within research, but also within policy and within community-based interventions, we are moving in the direction where people are acknowledging that this is important. So I guess part of the question is, like, where would you like to see us as a community push more, and then maybe reaching out to those people and inviting them to a festival? Anyone else have thoughts?
Yeah, I want to pick up on your point about the people who actually maybe already do these things, because one of the things I've been finding with dance research is it's quite niche. And a great way to get more people involved, get more funding, get more like big name researchers on board is actually just ferret out the people who actually love tango dancing, say, and like every weekend they're at milongas, and you mentioned that you're doing dance research and they go, oh my God, can I do something on your project? And, exactly. And you're there like, but you're this huge researcher and I'm just a baby PhD student. Like, what? And that is so powerful, of finding the people who actually already love it and are doing it, who, as you say, are in positions of power, and bringing them on board. And also with a kind of long-term view is one of the really important things with getting kids involved and getting kids playing music, learning to dance. It's one of the things that a lot of musicians and music teachers say. It's so important to get kids playing, because 90% of your students, 99% of your students, they are not going to be professional musicians. They are tomorrow's audiences. They are tomorrow's advocates. And that is something which can be really, really powerful on exactly your point.
Can I come in really briefly as well? Those were like super, super beautiful answers. And I'm kind of embarrassed about slipping into my role as like the boring policy guy. But like pragmatically, to answer your question, this is a thing that obviously comes up quite a lot in the work that I've been involved with for the last couple of years. And a lot of people are like, well, why? Like, what's the point? And there's like two kind of key tricks that you can use if you're trying to convince like government or like ministers for health and stuff. The first one is just to talk about cost effectiveness. There's loads of studies into cost effectiveness of like prevention for arts interventions for depression, that kind of thing. And if you talk to someone in policy who's kind of spinning all these different plates and trying to manage different silos, and you're just like, this is one of the cheapest things that you can do and it's proved to be effective, that's one key thing. And the other one is, especially when comparing arts and health to other population health interventions, like with art specifically, there's an intrinsic motivation to engage in these kind of activities. Like, it's a bit different to taking a pill or wearing a mask or washing your hands, that kind of thing. Like, art is intrinsically motivating to be engaged in itself. And if you can kind of say that to someone who's in a position of power, be like, loads of studies have dropout rates, and even within arts and health there's a really high dropout rate. But in terms of like patient continued participation, because art is like, people intrinsically want to do it, that kind of helps. So there's just two quick key tricks.
That was a very good question. Yes, Paulina.
Not to be like, I have a paper about this. The first thing I did for my PhD was I looked at all of the literature we could find that exists about social dance for mental health. I do remember there was a folklore circle study. I also remember there was just one that we found that qualified for that review, which was, I think, basically just addressed depression or something related with a questionnaire at all. So if I had to guess, I would say that probably there are multiple studies out there, and probably it would be lovely to look at that kind of in a more methodologically rigorous way. Because, yeah, and I think that that's the real difficulty of doing this research, is we know that things like this really do help, and especially people who've kind of had those experiences. And how do we, exactly what Calum was saying, kind of put this in front of the people who might not know that already, but for whom it might be able to be amplified to populations that could use it. So, yeah, I don't think there's a ton out there, but I'm happy to send you the paper.
Do you happen to remember what it was about? I mean, it was probably a while ago as well when you read it.
It was definitely, so I remember reading folklore circles because I haven't participated in one myself yet. And it must have been something related to mood disorders.
A bit of a tangent. Could you explain what a folklore circle is? Paulina, do you know?
really good question. Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure. So, for example, capoeira has music, and capoeira music sings about kind of the history of capoeira and different struggles that the people who developed capoeira faced. That's part of capoeira, but it's not necessarily a part of capoeira that gets talked about in every capoeira class. And so in that way, it would be more like passive absorption of that part of the ritual. I think different types of dance have different kind of ways of addressing that, but I'm sure there's something there.
If I can jump in, I'm not sure how relevant it is, but there's certainly some research on work songs, which I feel are related enough to your question to be relevant. I can't remember his name, but there's a guy in Vienna who is researching work songs in different contexts. And there are also quite a few people who are researching various sort of folk traditions musically. And there's an enormous data set essentially of German folk music, which a lot of those researchers use. But I don't know how much there is on like getting people to be singing or dancing in that kind of way that you describe. I haven't come across anything really, actually, which is a terrible shame.
This is, again, going to be a little embarrassing because the paper is from several years ago at this point, but there is definitely a section in there on kind of culturally competent therapies and using traditions that have come from a group of people with that group of people in a way that is potentially quite effective for mental health. But I'll send around the link to the paper. Yeah, of course.
Anna's
question. Okay. Sorry. So this is the question for the sake of the recording is there any research looking at how acoustic spaces affect us and the way we respond to them, and whether there's sort of empirical work on that? There is, and I'm trying to remember the person's name, but he's does interesting work both as an ornithologist and looking at how birdsong adapts to acoustic spaces, and then looking at how he applies these models that he developed in ornithology, I believe, to looking sort of at how the fact that certain bands like Pink Floyd and the Beatles, where they started and where and how that particular sound had to do with a specific place, and how that shaped their sound, and how there's a sort of almost cultural evolutionary aspect of the shaping of the performers that seems to lend itself to their sort of cultural success. It's slightly different than how we respond to a space, which is perhaps, I mean, I'm interested in the sort of translation from one to the other. And so that bit hasn't been studied as far as I know, but the closest I think is this researcher whose name is not coming back, and I was hoping it would as I started talking about his work. I can look up the papers. It sounds like Lauren is going to have to send around a list of research. But yes, this is something that I'm sorry. But it's a very interesting thing, and the answer is yes. The sort of space does seem to have some aspect which has not been fully studied yet, and so that is something we should look at. But I can send via Lauren what we do know.
There's a field called neuroaesthetics. I don't know anything about it, but maybe worth Googling. Is that also, I feel like your work?
Yeah, what I do kind of overlaps a lot with neuroaesthetics. Oddly, though, most people who work in neuroaesthetics don't really seem to do anything much on neuroscience of dance, which I find very strange because I feel like it should be very embedded, and it's just not. There is a study that I'm involved in. Actually, it's not so much acoustic, but it is about exploring space, and we have not analyzed the data yet. I am hoping to in a postdoc where we have the people explore the space, and then they do this whole quite long study where they're watching someone dance, they're learning that routine, they're then imagining themselves dancing it, and then they're actually dancing it, all while wired up with EEG electrodes. Yeah. So, and then they explore the space again at the end of the study. And one of the things we're really interested to see is, will that change pre and post, given that they've spent a lot of time doing all of these different activities with the dancing, principally in the middle of that space? And will we see a difference when they go through these different areas of the space that they've explored very differently? We have no idea yet because we are yet to analyze the data, but it will touch on exactly your question. Another thing that came to me, which is not specifically research, but is also interesting in terms of acoustics. I was speaking to someone many years ago who used to run a choir in a boys' school in the UK. And he would always get the boys to practice at least one rehearsal outside. And they would systematically win school choir singing competitions. And he attributed a lot of that success to the fact that all of the other schools, they would just only ever be rehearsing in a small practice room, maybe a classroom, and acoustically just quite a small space. So when they would get to this huge concert hall, the other choirs would not have the experience of the projection into that much larger space and that completely different acoustical environment compared to his boys, who would have had ideally several, but always at least one weather-dependent outdoor rehearsal.
Not empirical, but I can entirely sort of anecdotally attest to that. I make my choirs do that for this reason, singing in lots of different spaces, and it has actually paid dividends.
And at school, actually, my viola teacher would also always basically nag me to go and practice in lots of different spaces. And we had a small concert hall as well. He'd say, like, you go and practice in the concert hall. You make sure you're practicing in the bigger practice rooms as well as the smaller practice rooms. You make sure you're projecting. So imagine there's a spider right at the back of the concert hall on the top of the ceiling. And that's the audience member that you're performing for. That's the projection that you need. Also anecdotal, not empirical, but also really important in that we as researchers, we need to be going out and talking to the musicians and the dancers and the people who are doing this for a living, who know what they're doing. And it's always so frustrating when you see research and someone spent 3 years of a PhD and I'm like, my viola teacher told me that when I was 15. Why did you spend 3 years researching this? And now you present it as though it's this great new finding. It's like, okay, study it empirically, but like go and talk to some people who are doing this. Like, it's their job. They know what they're doing. Include them in your research.
That was a wonderful discourse. Earlier, I did see more hands. Yes, back there. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have an opinion or is there any research on the type of music? I mean, we hear electronic music because it work for us. Or would you say it doesn't matter if it's techno or gangster rap? Just the same.
Did you say gangster rap? Okay. Yes. So the question is generally impact of the type of music or genre or style on the state of flow, right? In this like interconnected environment. Would any of,
Well, I'm going to let the people who are more qualified to answer this answer it in a second. But out of a study that we just did, very much one, if you think it's going to work for you, generally with mental health interventions, if you think it's going to work for you, it's more likely that it's going to work for you. And two, in a recent study, dance, not music, so I'll let the music people speak to the music, but enjoyment really did moderate how well the intervention worked. And so I have the feeling that if your thing is house music and we drop you in an orchestra, it might not work as well as if your thing is house music.
That is entirely true. However, I think, not to preach to the choir too much, but in some sense, the music that we have here is the most streamlined way. And often when we're looking at trying to induce a sense of concentration, and other researchers will sort of use this almost as the sort of just the experimental, I guess, method rather than sort of the content of the research. But they will often use sort of trance house music because it induces a very strong sort of rhythmic entrainment so easily, and it's very easy for them empirically to then separate out sort of this is exactly what the pulse is, and it makes it easier to control some of the other aspects musically. Part of my work is trying to sort of look at which components of music particularly convey different kinds of emotions, and how composers, again, talking to the composers directly, the big part of my work is the fact that nobody's actually asked the composers how they shape these things. Like 99% of the studies I've looked at over the last 4 years have focused entirely on listeners, and it's like, well, we think that composers must have meant this because this is how listeners respond. It's like, well, composers are there too. We can ask them. And so I did. And part of it is trying to isolate these different aspects. But one of the sort of most critical, both empirically attested and from what composers talk about, is this sense of rhythm, which I think is clearest perhaps in these sorts of contexts. But of course, if you're coming from a background where you just really hate sort of house music, and even though it has this very strong and training beat, you will have other sort of more top-down psychological processes that will sort of make you more resistant, perhaps, to slipping into that sense of flow. So there's the beauty of this is that it's sort of very individualized, and there's lots of individual differences, even as we, I think, can look at the more collective aspects of how it does entrain individuals into these group collective processes.
I would add to that, yes to all of the above. And one of the things that is also kind of sits nicely on top of that is quite a bit of research, a lot of it actually done in my lab here in Denmark, in Aarhus, on different features of the music that are most likely to induce flow states, to get people moving, and like what, for example, what frequencies, what strength of beat. And so these are things that can be present in all sorts of different types of music. So you might have something classical, orchestral, with very strong beats that gets people kind of, okay, classical concerts depends obviously, but say if you're somewhere like the Proms in London, where a lot of people are standing and it is very socially acceptable to move around, that people would actually be moving around to that. Also, you might have something classical orchestral where there isn't really a strong beat and people are not really going to be feeling it. They're not going to be maybe getting into that flow state as easily. And you can also look at that across genres, which is really, really helpful, because then you can look at specific features and individual differences, working in with what both Brennan and Peter were saying in terms of preference and what you actually want to listen to and what is likely to work for you in terms of genre.
They're all amazing. Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. The only tiny anecdotal thing that I have is the singing for postnatal depression project we did. Obviously there wasn't much techno or psytrance, because with a baby might not be ideal. Would be interesting to see, but we were kind of left it quite open for it. They might love it. Stage 2. But we kind of left it completely open to the music leads in each different country and each different city to kind of do what they personally as musicians want to do and what the mums would like to do. And it kind of ranged from country to reggae to rock to pop to all these different kind of things. And they all kind of found, and linking to what you said about wanting to engage in the kind of music you want to engage in, they all kind of had the same broad impact on symptoms of postnatal depression and feelings of interconnectedness and belonging. So in that context.
Yes, Paulina. Yeah, I skipped over my background earlier anyway because I wanted to give more focus to our wonderful guests. But I have a background in theater, dance, and music, most recently music. I am completing a master's in expressive therapies, but specifically a specialization in drama therapy and clinical mental health counseling at Lesley University in Boston. A few months ago, I started a research assistant position at Stanford's psychophysiology lab. So a lot of that looks at emotion regulation, and what I would like to do in the academic space is hopefully do a PhD where I look into the arts and emotion regulation, arousal regulation, and also personality and individual differences. But I've also really tried to have this bleed over into my music business life. So part of KUNE is something I really enjoy, is the emotional connection, the interconnectedness, the community that we find. And then I also have a small business where I manage record labels, but I want like the ethos or like the marketing aspect to really focus on how does this music make us feel? When we market the music, how does it make listeners feel? And is that considered when people release music? And then what else do I do? Sorry, there are a list of things. And then I also still teach some acting classes on the side. So, you know, part of putting together this panel, I've just met such wonderful individuals over the last year. And I think it's the interdisciplinary aspect and prioritization that I see from you all that really inspires me. I mean, we're all part of programs that value creativity and also value seeing results and impact in certain communities, whether it be in dance communities, in orchestral, maybe in more like regional territory-based practices. So it's just been such a pleasure to bring all of you guys together. Yeah. I don't know if that was the end, but we do have some more time. So are there any questions? Yes.
Yeah. So the question was the project in Greenland. What does the co-creation process look like, and are we engaging, or are indigenous practices emerging? Yeah, thanks for the question. So it's, like I said, it's starting in November and it's going to go until January. And we've kind of been doing it for 2 years to figure out the best way we can do it in the kind of most effective way. And a lot of that has involved, like I said, working with this youth council of young people in Greenland, who are based specifically in Asiat, which is like at the southern bit of northern Greenland. And we've also been working with a range of indigenous researchers and indigenous artists and musicians. And when we did this series of co-production sessions when was it? Like March, April time, we were there for a fortnight and ran like 4 different sessions, which like practically what it looked like was asking a couple of questions and then making dinner for everyone so they could all come, which is the best job I think I've ever done. And one of the key things we were asking is like, right, what kind of activities do you like to engage in? And there's like one bar that a lot of people go to. There's a lot of sport. There's like the dog sledding race in Asiat, which is happening the weekend after we were there. These things all came up. And one of the key things that came out of it was like craft and material things as a kind of, cultural heritage. And I was kind of thinking about it when we were talking about the folk circles. It seems similar, the kind of engagement to and connection with historic artistic practices came up quite a lot. And I think one of the key reasons why that seemed to be the case in that context is obviously the like really difficult colonial history in Greenland and kind of connection to, obviously I can't speak on behalf of people because that's really dodgy and I don't know enough anyway, but one of the key things that came up is kind of connection to like the Kalaalleq language and indigenous history and everything that's been happening in Asiat and in the kind of like Disco Bay area and then in Greenland more broadly, and things like crafts and dog sledding and song were all kind of things that have come up in that context.
I will. I'm going to speak specifically to partner dance, and I'm going to speak kind of in the context of being somebody who teaches it. I think so we tend to have a really large population in social dance communities of people who work in STEM, kind of science, engineering, technology. And I've wondered about that for a long time. And I think that something that's really beautiful about an activity that has structure, but also freedom, is that we can give you tools. We can give you little pieces of, okay, you do this turn this way, you do these steps this way. And if you learn these things, you're going to be able to have essentially really fluid conversations with the people around you in a way that isn't necessarily true in a room full of scientists who are just kind of dropped there. I think something, I can't speak quite as much to things that are not social dance, but in terms of having being able to really give you the building blocks to then be able to connect with other people feels very powerful. And I think especially within contexts, there are lots of different contexts why you might not have the ability to do that. It could be for mental health reasons. It could be for other reasons. It could be for a lot of reasons. And then I think people who maybe struggle with that will often gravitate toward these creative endeavors that have kind of more structure to then be able to express. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that is very similar when you're building a community in anything. And one of the key things obviously is just like having common interests, because then you have a starting point for conversations, and also just regularity. I actually started dancing salsa when I was in Oxford, and then I moved back to London, and I was living in London for 5 years, and I think I made one new friend. Like, I'm from London. I grew up there. And in 5 years living there, I couldn't make a whole new community again. I couldn't make friends in the same way that I had, because I was going to dance classes, I was going to musical things, I was playing violin and viola, but there just wasn't the regularity of contact, of having those same people coming every week. And I think it's one of the things, at least in my experience, I don't know what research there might be on this, but in terms of living in a smaller city versus living in a bigger city, that you have regular contact with people with whom you have something in common. And that's a really good, solid foundation as a starting place for building community, no matter what that is, whether that's dance, whether that's music, whether it's crochet, whether it's some aspect of science, whether it's gliding or scuba diving. It can kind of then be anything.
I think just the other half of that is maybe people you have things in common with, but also maybe people you have nothing in common with. Maybe you've moved to a new city and you don't speak the language, and you don't know anyone there yet, but you somehow across the world learned these same tools that they did for how to do a turn. And so that you can start having some sort of dialogue, even if it's not linguistic dialogue. So I think it kind of both halves of that.
I've done that. I've done exactly what you describe was my life 3.5 years ago when I moved to Denmark, basically. So yes.
I do have a final question for our speakers, and I think Peter might have something specific to say on this, as mentioned earlier. We're all at a festival this week. KUNE, we're here until Sunday. Some of us longer, some of us came earlier. So far, are there any examples of connection that you've seen at this festival, or do you have any words of wisdom to share for making connections while we're here on the island?
You're directing this specifically to me. Well, no, I mean, we were talking about when we were talking about how we wanted to shape the panel, and I had sort of said, I was asked whether I was going to have an activity, and I said I don't really think I need to have an activity, because sort of the activity about the sort of group emotion convergence and lots of the things that I look at is what we're doing the entire time we're here. And so my activity, sort of tongue-in-cheek, was going to be like, okay, go out and do it now, right? You've listened to us talk about it. You have been doing it. You're going to go continue to do it. And it's sort of the idea of like the expertise. Like in some sense, you do have the expertise in forming this community specifically, right? You're here. You're doing it. It is what we're doing. It is the activity. But I mean, it has been very interesting to sort of be part of it and see it happening, feel it happening. And I don't know. And when we're talking about the sort of, is there a sort of blueprint that sort of applies to sense of community? I suspect we'll be talking more about this again tomorrow, so do come to the panel talk tomorrow. But one of the other studies that I'm involved in, sort of aside from my PhD work at Oxford, is a cross-cultural study of science and spiritual yearning in science. And one of the questions we've been asking these scientists across 4 different cultural contexts is, do you have a strong sense of connection to others, either in your work or outside of it? And very often they talk about having this strong sense of connection to others in the arts, in music, and talking about going to festivals, talking about sort of joining a community choir or things like that. And so I think in some sense there's this underlying sort of rhythm to what we do, not just here, but how we take that beyond. And this is something that probably could be quantified. I don't know that it should necessarily be quantified, but we can empirically gesture to it. And I think I'm getting away from your question slightly. No, but Anyway, and the model that my actually master's work has looked at, sort of this transcendence, is this sort of pattern of encounter, enlightenment, and transmission. How we sort of have this passive encounter of something, it allows us to have these new insights, and then we have this sort of responsibility to transmit it and share it, to go beyond ourselves, and that is a key component of what we mean when we say self-transcendence, moving beyond the limits of the self, and a lot of that is forming these communities, being present in these communities.
Well, I only arrived like 2 hours before
Sorry.
this talk, so I haven't experienced all that much here, to be perfectly honest with it. It has been amazing though, just like coming out here and being here, and it's been very fun seeing people's reactions when I tell them, so I'm going to this festival and I'm going to talk about my research. And every single person has gone, what? And I'm like, yes, it's amazing. I have the best job. So I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. The extent of people I know at this festival are here. But this morning I had a really lovely experience. We were walking past a bar and some lovely song was playing and I was kind of shimmying and someone was walking this way and she shimmied back. And I think that's the name of the game. I mean, very much to the poem that Calum read. I think if somebody shimmies, shimmy back.
That's lush. Yeah, I don't know what it is about festivals that just, like in all the work I've done ever, I think the key thing that comes out, whether it's art or dance or theatre or whatever, is that what makes everything tick is people and nice people. And festivals is where people are the nicest. Like, I'm biased. My mum and dad met at Glastonbury. I'm very much a festival kid. In terms of interactions, I don't know, like I said, I'm kind of here on my own. And I've been a bit like, right, Cal, go and talk to people. So I was talking to Lauren about when I was getting my ferry over, and I was like, I need the earliest one possible because if I miss Martinu, I'm going to cry. And then he was ordering a pizza while I was ordering a pizza, and I was like, right, go up and say. And it was like the loveliest interaction I think I've ever had. He's amazing. And that's the kind of thing that if it was in the street, like in Tesco's in Bristol, I would run away and regret it. And then another thing, just as I was walking over here this morning, or just before this talk, I saw two friends meet. And from a distance, one was like, mate, how you doing? And then from literally like 30, 40 foot away, they just went, I'm so chill. And I was like, that's such a perfect reaction and kind of sums this place up.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Peter, Olivia, Brennan, and Calum, we really enjoyed hearing your individual presentations and also the moments you've picked out from this festival. Peter will be speaking at a panel again tomorrow, also with Leo moderating over there to the side. Wonderful, Leo. And if you see them on the island, so maybe around for a few days, feel free to walk up to them and ask any questions. I hope that's okay to say. Okay, lovely.
And can I just jump in and say thank you so much, Lauren, for inviting us and for organizing all of this. It's been so much work. And I know I can speak for all of us when I say we massively appreciate it. And it's been fantastic. And also thank you, Leo, for sorting out Mike's doing your magic stuff so that we don't get feedback issues and sorting out the camera and everything. Just, yeah, it's amazing that we are able to just show up and talk. And you guys have done everything else. So thank you.
Of course.